Greetings, Johnny Matthews here with Cannabis Talk Show Live, and we are capping off our 420 weekend on a Monday, April 24th. I'm here with a pioneer doctor in the industry, Dr. David Bearman, located in Goleta, California. And Dr. Bearman, thank you so much for allowing Cannabis Talk Show Live to come up and get this great interview as we cap off this 420 weekend in 2017.
Well, thank you very much for having me. So you've just kind of turned me loose here, and I'll see what I can do about holding this all together. We were talking before we went on the air here about the Marijuana Tax Act, and what I pointed out there is that the Marijuana Tax Act was really pushed by the petrochemical industry, specifically DuPont. And DuPont wasn't concerned about marijuana, they were concerned about hemp. Everybody in the United States knew what hemp was, so they could hardly say that they wanted to make hemp illegal. Now, marijuana wasn't that widely known. There were very few Anglos that used the term marijuana, and even less African Americans who referred to marijuana as Muggles or Mary Jane. And the Hispanic population was a much smaller percentage of the total population than it is now. As a matter of fact, the AMA, which testified strenuously against the Marijuana Tax Act, complained most strenuously about the use of the term marijuana. They said, we had no idea you were talking about cannabis. And the AMA, in their testimony against the Marijuana Tax Act, said that cannabis, they knew of no dangers from the medical use of cannabis. And then they pointed out that they had checked with the Bureau of Prisons, the Children's Bureau, the United States Public Health Service, and that the United States government had no information, no data whatsoever indicating any harm from the medical use of cannabis. In fact, the chief lobbyist for the AMA, who was both a physician and an attorney, accused Harry Anslinger, who was the first director of the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, of having nothing but a fistful of newspaper clippings. He had no information. Anslinger was a raving racist. As a matter of fact, I did a poster presentation at the International Cannabinoid Research Society meeting several years ago, and after the first day, the president of the organization came up to me and said, would you take Anslinger's quotes down? People find them offensive. I said, I find them offensive too. I said, that's why they're up there. And apparently she didn't get it. What I wanted to do was to demonstrate to the researchers why they had to jump through so many hoops in order to do their research with cannabis, and it has to do with the propaganda. The propaganda that we have about cannabis has been extremely successful, and it has put a stigma on this medicine that it does not deserve to have. I mean, if we recognize that in 1942, that was the year that cannabis was taken out of the United States Pharmacopoeia, the longtime editor of the Journal of the American Medical Association, a physician named Morris Fishbein, said that cannabis was the best medicine for treating migraine headaches. And that echoes the founder of modern medicine, Sir William Osler, who wrote the first textbook of internal medicine in 1892 and was one of the founders of Johns Hopkins. He also said that cannabis was the best treatment for migraine headaches. Now, the federal government wasn't really interested in this. Dr. Ethan Russo, who some of you may know was for more than a decade the North American medical consultant for GW Pharmaceuticals. Some of you may remember that GW Pharmaceuticals makes tincture cannabis. It is marijuana. You may have seen Sanjay Gupta's documentary, and there they are standing in one of their 6 greenhouses in southern England. Each greenhouse has a different strain of cannabis. Each greenhouse has 10,000 plants. Each of the 10,000 plants is a clone of the other. And what they do is they take tinctures from 2 different strains, one high in THC and one high in CBD, to make a product that they call Sativex. Its generic name is Nabiximol. It's legal in 24 countries in the world. The United States is not one of them, even though in 2010 a phase 3 clinical trial was completed in upstate New York demonstrating that Sativex was useful in treating intractable pain. And this shouldn't come as any surprise. Those of us who practice cannabinoid medicine, the most common reason that we have for recommending cannabis is for treatment of pain. In fact, there was an article in the Journal of the American Medical Association about 15 months ago, maybe 24 months ago now, showing that in states where medicinal cannabis was legal, there had been a 30% drop in overdose deaths due to opiates as compared to states where it was still illegal. Also, those of us practicing cannabinoid medicine have found that people with pain are able to decrease their opiate dose by 30 to 50%. So this is something that is truly amazing and truly remarkable, and it's exciting to see the mainstream medicine begin to appreciate the medicinal value of cannabis. More and more physicians are beginning to appreciate it, and this is kind of an uphill battle because a recent survey about a year ago showed that only 13% of medical schools even teach about the endocannabinoid system. So we know that the reason that cannabis and cannabinoids work is that the body has its own endocannabinoid system. We have our own marijuana-like chemicals called anandamide and 2-AG. We have a couple of receptors, not too creatively called CB1 and CB2 receptors, and they're extremely important. They're important in terms of homeostasis, in terms of keeping us kind of centered. They have an influence on almost every organ system, which is why the therapeutic benefits of cannabis are so broad. And it's almost a detriment to the plant because when you talk to physicians about its medical value, they say, well, no one medicine can have this great breadth of therapeutic applications. And in fact, cannabis does have a great breadth of therapeutic applications. In addition to pain, which of course can be caused by many, many things, one of the conditions that has gotten a lot of publicity of late is epilepsy. Now, we've known that cannabis treats epilepsy not only for thousands of years in terms of the historic use, but in modern times, one of the first modern studies on cannabinoids was done in 1947 by a couple of researchers named Ramsey and Davis. And they were looking at 7 children that had cerebral palsy who also had intractable seizures. And when they gave them synthetic THC, 5 of the 7 had almost no seizures or no seizures. And they suggested in the article that they wrote in 1949 that was published in a peer-reviewed medical journal that these studies should be repeated in people who were not in institutions as the original subjects were. And sure enough, 65 years later, those studies were done. Wow. I mean, the United States government has been good at one thing, and that is preventing us from learning more about the benefits of cannabis, and they have blocked almost all double-blind studies. And we're beginning to see a few of those studies now, but not very many. And what's really disturbing to me is that we knew in 1974, as a result of a study that was done at the Medical College of Virginia by Dr. Billy Martin, that cannabis and cannabinoids kill cancer cells. There was an excellent review article in 2008 put out by the University of Wisconsin, which is where I started medical school, so I have a certain amount of confidence in them, in which they pointed out 15 different cell types, cancer cell types, that responded to cannabis. And their title of the article was Progress and Promise for Cannabinoids Treating Cancer. And this is something that's really exciting. What we can say today in regards to cannabis and its effect on cancer is best summed up by Dr. Donald Abrams, who is an oncologist at the University of California, San Francisco, who says there's more than enough basic science studies and anecdotal reports to justify doing double-blind studies to see whether or not cannabis actually can cure cancer. And in fact, there are two such studies that are going on in the world today, one in the United Kingdom and another in Israel on glioblastoma. The way in which we think, that is the researchers who've been testing this on mice, think that cannabis works in terms of cancer is that it affects one of the genes that has to do with metastasis. This was a study that was done on breast cancer by Dr. Sean McAllister up in San Francisco. We also believe that it interferes with angiogenesis, which is the formation of new blood vessels. And cancer tissue, like any tissue, needs to be nourished. And if you don't have the blood vessels, you're not going to get the nourishment. And lastly, the cannabinoids seem to encourage something called apoptosis, which is accelerated cell death, particularly of old or abnormal cells. Obviously, there's a lot more that we need to learn, but at the present time, there's an enormous amount of exciting research that has been done and is being done in regards to the use of cannabis for cancer. Now, in terms of sort of less exciting things than that, we have a study that's going on right now by Dr. Susan Sicily, who was at the University of Arizona until she was forced out by the state legislature, who threatened the University of Arizona with cutting off some of their funding if it allowed her to stay there and do her research on post-traumatic stress syndrome. Post-traumatic stress syndrome is commonly associated with people that have been in the theater of war, but it's also very common in people who grew up in dysfunctional families, in people who have been raped, people who have been in natural disasters. It's something that is extremely common. And what we have seen as a result of anecdotal reports is many people with post-traumatic stress disorder who benefit from the use of cannabis. And this is most likely because of the way that cannabis works. There's an excellent article that appeared in a 2004 edition of Scientific America by Dr. Brad Elger and Dr. Nickel called The Brain's Own Marijuana, in which they talk about the way in which cannabis works in terms of modulating the speed of neurotransmission. It does this by slowing down the speed of neural impulses through something called retrograde inhibition. And this is important because if you have neural impulses that are moving very rapidly, then our midbrain, the most primitive part of the human brain, the reptilian brain, takes over, at least takes over too much, so that we have a tendency to act first and think later. The use of cannabis slows down the speed of neurotransmission, giving the frontal lobes an opportunity to have more rational, more civilized thought, and for us to act first and think later. This is very helpful to people who have PTSD because they can be very explosive. They can have anger management issues. They can have impulse control issues. And it's not just people with PTSD. Dr. Daniel Piamelli, who is a researcher at UC Irvine, as well as Dr. Ethan Russo, who is a neurologist. As I mentioned, he spent 12 years or more as the North American consultant for GW Pharmaceuticals, have postulated something that they call an endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome. So our endocannabinoid system, like all human characteristics, is sort of distributed on a bell-shaped curve. So some of us are going to have less endocannabinoids than others, and some are going to have more. And those of us that have less are going to have rapidly moving neurotransmission, and there's a whole host of endocannabinoid deficiency diseases that we might have. Attention deficit disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, all kinds of things on the autism spectrum may be associated with that. And I have seen a number of children that have severe autism or serious autism spectrum disorder issues benefit from the use of cannabis and cannabinoids. Now, we've got a lot to learn. I mean, the cannabis plant, like all plants, is complicated. It has about 512 different molecules in it. That's not a whole heck of a lot. Coffee has 880. A tomato has 380. Of those 512, many have therapeutic value. 113 are cannabinoids. A cannabinoid is a 21 carbon molecule that either blocks or stimulates the CB1 or CB2 receptors. They have some overlapping kinds of therapeutic values, but they also have some different distinctive values in each one. According to Dr. Raphael Mechoulam, the grand old man of medicinal cannabis, who characterized the chemical structure of THC in 1964 and was amongst a group that characterized the endocannabinoid system in the late 1980s and early 1990s, in 1999 he talked about something he called the entourage effect, which is the totality of the therapeutic constituents of the plant acting together. It's not just the cannabinoids, it's also the terpenes. The terpenes are the thing that give the plant its distinctive odor, and many of the terpenes have some therapeutic value in their own right. So as we take a look at the future, we need to take a look at what ratio, what combination of ingredients, what combination of cannabinoids, what combination of terpenes are going to have the most value and the most specificity for the wide variety of medical conditions that we have seen both anecdotally and in animal research that respond to the therapeutic use of cannabis. And I think in closing, what I'd like to point out to people is that one of the most exciting things about cannabis as a medicine is that it has very few interactions with other drugs, and its side effect profile is very low. It's extremely safe. I mean, if the worst thing that happens is that you get a little high, that can't be too bad, because as Dr. Abrams, who is a cancer doctor, says, in his patient population, a little euphoria isn't a bad thing.
That is great.
Thank you.
Dr. Bearman, thank you so much, sir, for
my pleasure.
Sharing your knowledge with Cannabis Talk Show Live viewing listeners. We may have to make this a regular series.
Be my pleasure. I've enjoyed meeting you, and I hope we continue to work together.
All right. Yes, I look forward to working with you on many, many projects, sir. Have a great 420, rest of the 420 week.
All right, thank you.
Right.
You're going to enjoy this. I know you are. I was interviewed by a young lady.
Cannabis Talk Show Live, Johnny Matthews. We're closing out with Dr. David Bearman right here in Goleta, California.